Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this narration of the web series The Lost Terran. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 24. This area is now under quarantine. Unauthorized attempts to enter or exit will be fired upon, was the only warning the trio got, as just over a dozen tacits streaked into being 1 full light second from the station and the Esperanto. Munter was asleep, but Rix and Blind had been sitting up with each other. The exact reason had escaped Munter, despite Rix and Blind explaining it separately to them without translation, but still hadn't made sense. By the time the internal alarms triggered for Munter, Rix was already aboard the Esperanto and heading for the command deck. The torrent of inputs, the tacits in the space beyond, and the repeating quarantine demands filled Munter's space, as though the time resting on them wasted. "How long have they been there?" Munter asked. "About 5 minutes," Rix said, already clicking through the various buttons and panels on the command deck. "Any message attempts?" Munter guessed. "None so far, but they may be waiting on you," Rix began, rapidly tapping on a nearby pad. "PSS Esperanto, Nivet Solar Ray Station 3. Captain Rixum, Terran. Station Master Blind, Kun. Muntu 41972 Tacit. Status update requested." Munter knew the request would be honored. It always was, regardless of the situation, whether distress or in simple check-ins. "Tacit Munter 41972. Wanted for self-destruction. Alleged Terran. Wanted for protective custody. Station Master Blind. Unauthorized biological contamination. Quarantine indefinitely." Munter put this onto one of Rix's screens and also on the command room in the Nivet station. "What do you think, Rix?" Munter asked. Rix glanced at it. "I still don't like it. I get that I'm from the past and there's all kinds of diseases and the like. We're both a problem to each other now. But if their definition of protective custody is merely remotely Terran, then it involves me getting disappeared into a deep dark hole somewhere, and there is being no record of me or it. Not to mention, you're not destroyed," Rix said, flipping a few more switches. "And what do you think, Blind?" Munter asked through the communications link. No response was made. Munter tried a quick peek into the station, but saw the primary links of the station already being taken over by the tacits. Munter disconnected from the communication connection so fast that there was almost an audible clunk. "I do not know where Blind is." "She's probably on her own command deck, trying to sort this out from her side," Rix said. "That is entirely probable," Munter replied. "It is also possible that our FTL transition destroyed myself." "No idea. All of how it works is beyond me. No ambush protocols, though. Is a lot more dangerous, though. At least to any vessels around it," Rix said, leaning back. "Too bad we don't have the final set of coordinates, or we could just go there." "Tacit Munter 41972 not malfunctioning. Tacit Munter 41972 online," Munter protested. "Error. Tacit Munter 41972 not installed in authorized chassis. Authorized chassis destroyed by unknown energy associated with FTL method. Error. Method not found," was the reply. "Identify protective custody," Munter tried, hoping that maybe it was as bad as Rix seemed to think it was. "Protective custody. Beings isolated from galactic community indefinitely." "Identify criteria for protective custody under definition." "No permissible criteria found." "Identify criteria for exiting quarantine under definition." "Elimination of all organic compounds. Quarantining period expected to last no less than 45 standard years." Munter was taken aback. The quarantine protocol was built into their core. It made sense, given how quickly some microorganisms and similar could spread. Proper quarantines had to be enforced, except that such extreme measures were only ever enacted after actual breakouts of disease, and there weren't any allowances for updates to inoculations or any mitigating circumstances. "Identify reason for protective custody." Designation, alleged Terran. Munter tried to consider this and failed. Since when had tacits themselves included cared about organics this much, especially Terrans? Identify source of orders for protective custody. Tacit Matrix 10547. Provide logic structure for protective custody for alleged Terrans. Invalid request. Alleged Tacit Munter not authorized logic and structure. At this point, the process in the back of Munter's headspace seemed to almost laugh at Munter's attempts to follow logic, and the response that came with it. Munter had never heard of not being authorized logic structures. It was partially a violation of the tacit code of contact. No, strike that. It was a clear violation of it. Munter had heard about tacit matrices, but they were rare and tended to be attached to manufactories, typically supporting or governing multiple manufactories of a region. They couldn't recall the last time they'd heard of one issuing orders except for suppliers. I think your interpretation of the situation is correct, Rix, Mantu finally said. Then I think it's time for us to get out of here, Rix nodded. Any last-minute coordinates? None. Where are we going? Far enough out of the local neighborhood. We'll have a chance to get the last set of coordinates, maybe. What about Blaine? Mantu prompted and tried the station again, hoping the Tassets were leaving it alone. They weren't. The Tassets were in the process of shutting the station down and even attempted to lock the Esperanto into the dock, the systems being negated by something. What are you waiting for? Let's go, squawked Blaine, stumbling into the command deck, fully suited and clutching a bag. The Tassets are attempting to lock us into the station, but something is blocking it, Mantu said, printing the text into Blaine's suit screen. An old lever I never noticed before, labeled in some script I've never seen before, but it looked important. And blue, Blaine said. Mantu took a moment to process this. The process in the back of Mantu's head swirled slightly. Treated like the Esperanto. Mantu looked at the station again, and it hit him. The station that had been adapted for the Quinn must have been Terran at one point. It suddenly made sense, except it patently didn't. Mantu virtually dived at the station and pressed it for details, using all of the learned about the trinary systems used by the Esperanto, bypassing the more complex quantum pair links and sticking with optical links. It was all there, buried in the walls and struts and the bulkheads. There were massive gaps, too. Like an outpost station was floated up by the strange process. Rix's words coming back to Mantu. The Terran outpost station, yes, that fit. It also fit Blaine's statement about old systems not being used and so getting removed. Mantu dug into the sections of the station that they could. The Tassets might have had higher bandwidth means of control, but Mantu had deeper access. Mantu started by cutting the Tassets from the communications and by disconnecting the power from the Gullnet link. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. The Tassets noticed immediately and began moving inward, slowly, but coming. Rix, I can disconnect us, but if we can stay or take it with us, the station is Terran in origin, Mantu said to both Rix and Blaine. I know, was Rix's only reply. Please take what we can with us. I only brought what I could carry, Blaine indicated, and Mantu taking a fraction of a moment to translate for Rix. Rix frowned, but tapped on several controls and flipped several switches. 30 seconds later, and the Tassets still getting closer, Rix leaned back. It's as close as I can get it, and I can't promise anything. Jump space is like nothing I've ever seen, so there may not be much of a station on the other side, Rix said. Blaine merely nodded. Rix hit the switch, and the approaching Tassets and galaxy around them went black. Natural Predator System, Pack Mode Launch, 1200, 1131.48, 1115.28, error. Degraded jump recalculating, 614.28, 614.27. Rix turned back to Blaine. Blaine, for her part, felt a mix of exhilaration and shame. In the minutes since the Tassets announcing the quarantine had arrived and the Terran running for the Esperanto, Blaine had known that this was decision time. She had managed to gather some Rix believes from her quarters, a package of mealworms, and a small media device holding images of various other media of her life from before she'd become a houseless. It wasn't much. She then struggled into the emergency void suit and entered the Esperanto, barely managing the strange buttons. Immediately on entering, she was surprised by how cramped it was and how almost ridiculously heavy she felt. Knowing the Terran's size, she'd expected it to be much larger, but she couldn't guess why she felt so heavy, even allowing for the void suit. The apparently non-essential pathways were laden with all manner of materials from the auto-fabricator, contained in various fashions, so she had only one way to go. It had taken her through the shielding and into the main area. This was more open, but not by much. From here, she'd continued a kind of rush to find the Terran and the Tasset. She'd missed a lot on her way to this command deck. It was patterned very similar to her own, and so despite it being more cramped, it seemed almost normal, albeit definitely sized for a Terran rather than a Quinn. Rix's gaze upon her was the same steady gaze that she'd felt before. It seemed to be a kind of social prompt from the Terran, not one she was familiar with, but then the Quinn social prompts often went along the lines of, "Did you hear about?" It annoyed her to no end that her species was so shallow. Even in the odd Quinn romantic novella, which she begrudgingly had a few, a lot, there seemed a centric focus on contributing to one's house by entering into bondings with those of great potential or great status, or both. Even though she and the Terran couldn't talk without the aid of Manto, it didn't seem to matter. If it was worth saying, they said it. If it wasn't, they didn't. "Let's get you settled. We won't be able to check on the station until we're out of jump space," Rick said, Manto translating. Manto turned as much of their attention as possible onto the two organics. The lack of an outside and jump space still unnerved them. The two organics and their charge seemed strangely comfortable with each other, despite the fact that there was not a means of generating a sterilization field aboard. Rix led Blind to the section with the hibernation chambers and pointed to an empty one. "You can have this one. As far as I know, it's never been used, but I don't know what we're going to do about microbes and the like," Rix said. "I've downloaded all of the available medical data for caring for Raccoon, and our new medical systems can assist in this." "Is that what this big crate is?" Rix asked, pointing into the hallway. Blind seemed a little lost. Here she was, holding all of her possessions in her wings, houseless as ever, and having deserted her duty and possibly having destroyed or stolen the station in process. The chamber that the Terran had indicated for resting seemed far from comfortable, consisting of woven materials and spongy material that seemed to crackle as you moved on it. The sound caught Rix's attention, and he looked over. "Sounds like the bed has started to fall apart. Guess that's what it gets for not being in hibernation for a few hundred years. Can we print a new one?" Rix prodded the spongy material, eliciting more crackling sounds. "Yes, but first, I'm going to lower the gravity first to something Blind can handle more easily." Rix appeared to halfway panic as he looked over to Blind and realized that she was stooped, and not just because of the bag that she still carried. The gravity plates adjusted, and Blind almost instantly felt better, as though she'd been dropped half herself. She straightened. "Is that your normal gravity?" she asked Rix. "As close as I can manage based on his memory," Mantu indicated, as Rix leaned into his own hibernation chamber and pulled out a scroll. "How does he manage to live on that?" she asked, rhetorically. "Very well," Rix replied, carefully doing the Terran smile without showing bones, much to Blind's amusement. Blind also smiled a Quinn smile and turned to the indicated hibernation chamber. The spongy material wasn't much, but it would do for now. She only wished that she didn't have to bother with his void suit. She didn't know how the Terran had managed so much time in one, comparatively. She only hoped the last Quinn technician to visit the station had ensured this one was fully checked out. She also had no idea of how she was going to eat, drink, or relieve herself. And yet, looking at the Terran, even as predatory as he appeared, even outside of the massive void suit, she couldn't help but be excited. For the first time in a long time, she was going on an adventure, a proper one. She only hoped that it would live up to all those novellas in her bag and in her memories. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons. Casper Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Lord Azrekahl, Dragzoon W.R.E, Holly's sister, AmbroseKTal, and Quantem Wensday. Thank you very much.